Ah! Okay, so who in here likes shots? Nobody? Really? Nobody's raising their hands? Well, personally, I don't like shots either. So now, keeping that idea of not liking shots in mind, I want you guys to relive a part in your life. I want you to look back to when you guys were 12 years old. Life was a whole bunch simpler. You were in middle school, probably 6th grade. Maybe you didn't have hearing aids or a job or kids. Maybe you aren't taking super difficult AP and extracurricular classes. You were just a happy young kid living their life. And now, I want you guys to run up to that little kid and stab them with that same shot. Terrible view. I understand. Terrible, terrible view. I won't make you think about it again. But unfortunately for me, that was a part of my reality when I was 12 years old. You see, when I was 12 years old, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called type 1 diabetes. And if you guys aren't aware of type 1 diabetes, maybe you don't have it yourself, or you don't know somebody with type 1 diabetes, it's a very difficult disease from the very beginning at diagnosis. My diagnosis story goes a little something like this. When I was 12 years old, I became extremely ill. I was super sick and bedridden for 5 days with some of the most painful and terrible symptoms imaginable, really. First, I was drinking over 5 gallons of water every single day and using the restroom 10 times that. I was completely in my bed, losing weight rapidly, and the absolute worst of all, if you've ever had your foot fall asleep before, you know that tingling feeling? Well, that was all over my entire body 24/7 for 5 days straight. Now, my family and I at some point realized, hey, this isn't the common cold or the flu, it's something much more severe, so let's go to the ER, and we did. And we got rolled in there, the nurses came in, did a whole bunch of tests, and I have a feeling they knew what I had, but they were walking around there like, I don't know what's really happening. They're just kind of walking around because they can't say anything, they aren't the doctor. So finally, they didn't tell us anything, but they wheeled me up to the 2nd floor where you get admitted to a hospital for multiple days at a time. And finally, once I was there waiting for a few more hours, the doctor comes up and knocks on the door. Now, he's a really big, like, country, burly man. And it goes like this. Yeah, come in. Walks in the door. Well, son, I got some good news, I got some bad news. Bad news, you got type 1 diabetes, and you gotta get a shot like that every single day for the rest of your life, 5 times a day. Whoa, where'd this come from? How is that possible? Isn't there, whoa, kid, I got some good news too. You get to skip school on Monday. I was not happy to say the least, and he was realizing that, so he thought maybe with his fancy degree and decades of experience just being alive and being an old man, he would give me some of his wisdom. So he said, now, Tristan, you're the same boy you came in this hospital today as you are going to be leaving in 2 days. You're still Tristan Suplis, that fun boy who loves to go run and play soccer and have fun and not take any difficult classes. So whatever you do, do not let this sickness define you. Do not let your sickness define you, son. So I listened to him, and I acknowledged his degree and countless years of wisdom, and I took that knowledge outside of the hospital with me. When I left the hospital, I was a little bit ashamed of my diabetes, of my type 1 diabetes. I wasn't actively telling everybody about it or anything like that. But besides that, I was the perfect diabetic in every single form. I was testing my blood sugar when I need to, when you have to prick your finger all the time. I was giving shots, just like that terrible one, to myself 5 times a day, every day without failing. I was counting my carbs and dosing insulin properly accordingly. My blood sugar was in perfect range almost 99% of the day, and my A1C had come from something terrible to something better, something amazing for all type 1 diabetics. So by every metric, I was perfect. I was climbing this mountain of diabetes and I had made it to the peak. Now, being at your absolute best sounds like something amazing, right? But when I looked around me in my school, in my life, in my family, I was surrounded by nothing but people who didn't have type 1 diabetes. And they were doing their absolute best too. They were climbing their mountain, except their mountain wasn't the same size as mine. Sure, I was on the top of a mountain, but everybody else was on top of Mount Everest, biggest mountain in the world. So, despite my diabetic perfection and academic amazingness, I felt inadequate. And like nothing more than a statistic, just another 1 in 400 kids that had to suffer and not be as great because of my diabetes. But in this time, I was lucky enough to get some information about a wonderful summer camp called Camp Sweeney. Now, Camp Sweeney is an 18-day overnight camp that you go to in the summer where there's just about nobody but medical professionals and other type 1 diabetics. You get fully immersed in a diabetic environment where you are no longer that kid who's comparing themselves to others. You're just the same as everybody else. And when we heard about this, my mom, she was like, oh, well, 18 days and he's going to learn all about his diabetes and how to treat himself better? That's amazing. Yeah, of course I'll let him go. And now my 12-year-old ears heard 18 days, no parents, no supervision? Heck yeah. So me and my family decided that we were going to pack up our things and waddle our way over to Camp Sweeney, go through the gates and set down our stuff. And the second we got there, a couple of very nice college students came and helped us take all of our equipment and different diabetic supplies, clothes, night events, and outfits all out of my car and into the cabin with me. But I'll never forget it. The very first kid I saw at Camp Sweeney was the exact same height and age as me, a boy named Robbie, and he was 12 years old, and he ran up to me like crazy. He was like, oh my gosh, you're new here. I've never seen you before. What's your name? My name's Tristan. Oh my gosh, what's the highest blood sugar you've ever had? And I'm just like, oh, I think it was like 583 when I got diagnosed. And he's like, no freaking way. Mine was 1,282. And then he ran away 2 seconds later. Now, understandably, y'all would probably be pretty shocked and taken back in that situation. And understandably, I was too. But I was shocked for a different reason. Not because there was this crazy kid, I had seen 100 kids worse than him before, but because he was going against those wise words my doctor had given me. He wasn't following the norm of don't let your sickness define you. In fact, he was making the entire point of our conversation to be about type 1 diabetes, our shared sickness. And the more time I spent at Camp Sweeney, I realized that he wasn't the only one. 99 out of 100 kids at Camp Sweeney were all embracing their type 1 diabetes. They were really letting their sickness define them. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever heard this phrase before, but you are the sum of the 4 people you spend the most time with. And at my time at Sweeney, I spent a lot of time with people who were letting their sickness define them, who were really letting type 1 diabetes define who they were as people. So they rubbed off onto me, and I was starting to get into it too. I was, little by little, more of my conversations were becoming about type 1 diabetes and getting to know other people's diagnosis stories. Really engaging with everybody there, not just as a friend or as a person, but as another person with type 1 diabetes. And by the end of my very short 18 days there, I was, I kid you not, the king of the underground sugar-free gum gambling ring. Yep, that's me. Now, Camp Sweeney taught me many things about my diabetes and how to take better care of myself. But the most important thing I learned from type 1 diabetes and being at Camp Sweeney was to not just be a man with diabetes, but to really be a diabetic man. It's a really big difference there for me. Because you aren't just living with this lump on your side that's always weighing you down. You're really embracing it and letting your sickness define you and letting yourself grow from it. But Camp Sweeney only lasted so long, so eventually I had to leave, and I was taking this new let your diabetes define you mentality outside of camp with me. And the first time I really looked down and looked into myself and said, you gotta use your type 1 diabetes for good right now, is when I was giving a little informational meeting with newly diabetic families with new diabetic kids who had just been diagnosed. I was giving a little speech about, oh, hey, come to Camp Sweeney, it's cool. And then, right afterwards, I was invited by one of my colleagues, Spitty is his name, I promise that's his real name, and he offered for me to be a guest speaker at an upcoming Camp Sweeney fundraiser. And I wasn't really paying attention to him, and I'm just like, yeah, I'll do it, whatever. And after that, I went home, and I was looking on my phone, scrolling on social media, and I got a text from him. It was explaining all of the specifics of the events, where it was, what time, what I had to do. And at the time, I really hated public speaking. So I was scrolling through my phone. Oh my gosh. What did I get myself into? But if my family has taught me one thing, it is that if you agree to something or say you're going to show up to something, you have to do it no matter what. So, against my better judgment, I decided to go to the event and give my speech and tried my absolute best. And I went there, but it wasn't until after the event when a few people came up to me and said that they were really touched by my speech, that I realized that I was getting more involved in my diabetes and I was becoming a better person because of it. You see, I didn't just learn the values of getting over my fear of public speaking by going there. I didn't just get to interact with some really cool and rich people, but the more I let my type 1 diabetes define me, the more I was learning the value of being selfless and giving myself for others. Now I'm going to take a wild guess and think back to that statistic, 1 in 400 kids have type 1 diabetes. And I'm going to assume that since there's only about 100 people in here, you guys don't have type 1 diabetes. Maybe 1 or 2. So how is letting your sickness going to help you? Well, maybe you have a different sickness. Maybe you aren't suffering from type 1 diabetes. Maybe you're suffering from cancer, the flu, even the common cold. But I don't think there's too much to learn from the common cold. So what about another kind of sickness? What about a sickness like procrastination? Or better yet, something we've all suffered from. What about a sickness like laziness? Now y'all are probably thinking, how on earth is laziness going to help you? Like type 1 diabetes, maybe I saw the story there, but laziness? Well, I was confused when I heard this as well. You see, I got a story to go along with how laziness helps you. When I was in high school working on an engineering project for one of my classes, I was asked to interview in engineering at a local engineering firm. And I was very lucky and I was able to land an interview with a CEO of a small engineering firm at the time. Now, I sat down with the CEO and I did my full school project, but I had one question that wasn't on the school project that I asked at the very end. I asked him, hey, whenever you are looking to hire a new engineer or a new person to work at your company, what is one characteristic or trait you really look for in them? He said, without hesitation, I look for the laziest people out of the applicant group. Now, some of y'all are probably adults, maybe CEOs yourself, and have hired people before, and you're saying, nope, wrong. So I was thinking the same thing. But the CEO gave me a story to explain why. You see, when he wasn't a CEO, when he was a younger man, just fresh out of college, he didn't get straight to being CEO. He worked at a local tax office, doing nothing but grueling paperwork, clock in at 9 o'clock, clock out at 5 every single day. And he would always go to work and be so frustrated because the guy next to him, his colleague, his friend, would always be slacking off. He would never be doing work. He'd be on his phone, playing video games, doing crossword puzzles or whatever. He would never be doing his work except for the first hour of his job every day. And he's looking over saying, this is the laziest man I've ever seen. Why is he meeting all the same deadlines? Why is he getting promoted the same time I do? Why does he make the same I do? I work so much harder. But little did he know, his colleague was the laziest person ever. Maybe he knew that part, but he was embracing his laziness. He was letting his sickness or laziness define him. You see, this person, he was never going to be fine working 8, 9, 10 hours a day, and he understood that. He decided to invest into his laziness and create an algorithm that did 90% of his job for him. So him letting his laziness, his sickness define him, made him a greater, more productive, or at the very least, happier person. Now, he never ended up having the great idea of, hey, maybe I could sell this to the company and never have to work again. But maybe if you guys let your laziness, you could too. So these are just 2 examples of how letting your sickness define you can benefit you throughout all aspects of life. But that's just examples. Tonight is about you guys. It's your turn now. You have to ask yourself, how are you going to let your sickness define you? How are you going to look into your life and find your greatest sickness, your biggest downfall? And how are you going to let it refine you? How are you going to let it define you? How are you going to realize that your sickness isn't something that happens to you? Your sickness is something that happens for you. How are you going to realize that your sickness isn't something that limits you? Your sickness is something that liberates you. Your sickness isn't something that breaks you. Your sickness is something that makes you. So don't just let your sickness refine you. Let your sickness define you. Because if you don't, you'll never know the person you could have been. Thank you.